everyone, welcome back to the second installment of the Sensory Parenting Workshop. We want to support you in your journey as a parent to a wonderful sensory kiddo. It is my goal to educate and encourage you guys. We covered a lot in the first video. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch that one, pause this video and watch that first one. It lays the foundation for what we're going to be talking about today. We covered the lesser known senses like vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoceptive senses. Then we used a silly analogy to highlight how sensory processing is like the chief of staff, so to speak, to the brain and the body, deciding what input needs attention and what should be ignored. But sometimes that goes awry. Sometimes sensory processing doesn't operate properly. If important and needed information gets lost in the shuffle, so to speak, a child will seek after it. If a certain type of sensory input wants to hijack the sensory system and trigger the fight or flight response, a child will avoid that sense at all costs. Hence the term you may have heard, seekers and avoiders. Today I'm going to try and help you answer a question that I get asked a lot. Many parents approach me with a list of symptoms and they want to know how many boxes have to be checked off before their child is considered atypical. But before we go there, let's back up. What are the symptoms? I think these lists are helpful because a lot of behavior might not immediately seem to have a sensory origin, but they do. And I have one for you to print out and use as a reference. So pause this video and the link should be just below the player. So let's read through this list and see if your child exhibits any of the behavior you see. So the red flags for SPD are a picky eater, chews on their fingernails and clothing or other objects, licks non-food items, touches surfaces compulsively like running their hands along the car, absent-mindedly pinching your skin while they sit on your lap, a child who fidgets, constantly moving even while sitting, avoid certain textures. This is often seen with clothing and food choices, or hates being barefoot. Or maybe this child loves being messy, jumps in every puddle, hates being messy, won't get their hands dirty, fearful of loud sounds like fireworks, automatic toilets, etc., agitated by certain repetitive sounds, head banging, crashing into objects, aggressive, or clumsiness, poor muscle tone and coordination, poor body awareness, fear of heights, no fear of heights, craves spinning, avoids intense movement, craves inversion of the head, fears being inverted, toe walking, poor sleeping habits, trouble focusing on specific sounds like your voice when there's a crowd around you, struggles with fine motor skills like handwriting, poor balance, constantly jumping or flapping the arms. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. Remember how kids are getting sensory input 24/7 from tons of different senses? So pretty much every action involves some kind of sensory factor and has the potential to be an issue. If your child has some of these symptoms, don't be alarmed. Heck, don't be surprised if you have some of these symptoms. You want to know why? Everyone has sensory needs. I'm going to say it again just so this sinks in. Everyone has sensory needs. Your body needs sensory input to function, and each body is wired a bit differently. Some of us crave certain textures, some of us are repulsed by certain sounds. Some of us love roller coasters, some of us have a chewing gum habit. These sensory needs are real needs. They're not just quirks or preferences. So the good news is, regardless of diagnosis, getting good sensory input is going to benefit everyone. All those benefits that kids with SPD get from doing sensory activities, typical kids get those benefits too. Getting movement during learning activities can help anyone learn. Weighted blankets can help anyone calm down. Using fidgets can help anyone focus. So don't get hung up on whether or not your child has a diagnosis. You can start helping your child today by getting good sensory input while you pursue professional help. Where should you start with sensory activities? Do you remember the proprioceptive sense that we talked about last time? It provides body awareness through the joints and the ligaments. The proprioceptive system is the powerhouse of all the other senses. Proprioceptive input helps the brain to regulate and handle all the other senses. Proprioceptive activities can help a child regardless of their unique needs, from auditory avoiders to oral sensory seekers. Proprioceptive activities are anything that involves heavy work for the joints and the ligaments. So we're talking jumping, climbing, pushing, pulling, and any kind of weighted object. The Sensory Parenting University has a massive searchable video library of sensory activities, so you'll be able to select proprioceptive sensory activities, select what type of equipment you have available, and it'll show you a bunch of options. All right, so everyone has sensory needs. Everyone can benefit from sensory activities, but how do medical professionals decide if a child truly has SPD and not just typical kid stuff? Function. Do the sensory needs interfere with that child's function? Only an occupational therapist can determine this, and in our next lesson, we'll talk all about how to make sure the medical professionals are getting an accurate picture of what life is really like for your child. So yes, most folks will be able to check an item or two off this list. That does not necessarily equal sensory processing disorder, but you can still help meet those sensory needs regardless of the diagnosis. And if your child is struggling to function, you definitely want to help them get medical professional support. Okay, so you might have noticed that some of these symptoms are also polar opposites of each other, like fear of heights, no fear of heights. Loves getting messy, hates getting messy. That's because of what we talked about in the first video. Kids can respond to sensory input in different ways. Sometimes needed sensory input isn't registering, so the child has to go seek it out. Other times, certain sensory input likes to be a bully and take up the brain's full attention and send kids into a meltdown. So understandably, kids try and avoid that type of sensory input. In the Sensory Parenting University, we go into detail about why kids' symptoms aren't always consistent. One day they love a certain food, the next day they hate it. One day they can't stop spinning, the next day they don't want to have anything to do with it. There is a reason and a way to help, but that is too complex for this short workshop. Just remember, if you are seeing conflicting symptoms on a list like this, that's because kids respond to certain senses by either seeking or avoiding, and that can change day to day with the same kid. So spend some time filling out this list. This printable suggests that you keep an observation log. In our next video, we're going to talk all about that and give you the printable with all the necessary information. So when parents ask me, what's normal? The answer is sensory needs are normal. In fact, they're universal. Start meeting those sensory needs now. Start with proprioceptive activities. Don't wait for a diagnosis. An occupational therapist will help determine if your child's needs are so intense that they interfere with function, and they'll help get you an idea of where your child's specific needs are. In our final lesson, we're going to show you how to become the best advocate you can be for your child and the next steps to take. It's an important one. See you there.